Marcus of the Veneti kept his gaze down as he carried the silver tray through the atrium. He was no Marcus, not truly. His name had once been Edric, son of a chieftain slain in battle against Roman legions, but no one here knew that. To the palace, he was just another barbarian slave won in conquest, one more broken man bent under the empire's weight. Only he was not broken. Hidden beneath his subservience burned the purpose he had carried across half the empire: assassination. His target was not the emperor, too guarded, too far from reach, but the queen regent, Livia Drusilla, the woman who guided Rome with as much cunning as the Senate itself. She had crushed rebellions with her sharp tongue before armies even marched. If she fell, the empire's grip might loosen, giving his people a chance to rise. But as Marcus entered the triclinium, her presence struck him harder than he'd anticipated. Livia reclined among senators and generals, her dark hair bound in braids wrapped with pearls. Unlike the pampered wives of Rome, she carried herself with the sharpness of a blade, every word precise, every look deliberate. Her eyes, dark as polished obsidian, swept the room with a quiet dominance that made even old men lower their gaze. "Wine," one of the senators barked, snapping fingers at Marcus. He bowed, pouring with steady hands, though he could feel her eyes on him, not idly, but probing. It was not the first time. Since he had been assigned to the palace a month ago, he had caught her watching him, as if some instinct whispered he was out of place. He moved with practiced humility, but the habits of freedom, the way he stood, the way he looked at men without fear, were harder to hide. When the banquet ended, Marcus slipped into the shadowed corridors, heart steady despite the growing tension inside him. He was close to his chance. Within days, he would strike. Livia dismissed her guests with her usual mixture of charm and steel. When the last senator bowed and left, she rose, gathering her cloak. The torches flickered low, but her mind remained sharp. Something gnawed at her, as it had for weeks now, the tall, broad-shouldered servant with the northern accent he tried so poorly to hide. She had lived too long in politics to trust appearances. Men lied as easily as they breathed. A foreign slave with proud eyes. Too dangerous to ignore. "Fabia," she called softly. Her handmaiden appeared at once. "Yes, Domina." "That tall one. The new servant in the household. The one they call Marcus. Watch him closely. See who he speaks to, where he goes at night." Fabia bowed. "You suspect him of theft?" Livia's lips curved faintly. "No. Something worse. He is too careful for a thief." That night, Marcus slipped into the servants' quarters. The air reeked of sweat and oil, the wooden bunks packed close. He waited until snores filled the room before rising silently. He moved through the dark corridors with a predator's grace, down into the storage vaults beneath the palace. There, behind an urn, he retrieved the dagger he had smuggled in piece by piece, a barbarian blade of iron, small enough to conceal, sharp enough to pierce through silk and flesh. He knelt, whispering in his tongue, "For my father, for my people." And then he heard it. A soft shift of fabric, a shadow moving in the archway. Curious, came the cool voice of Livia herself. "A slave who prays with a weapon in hand." Marcus rose slowly, every muscle tensed. She stood before him alone, wrapped in a cloak of midnight blue, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. "No guards. No witnesses. You should not be here," he said, slipping easily into the broken Latin of a conquered man. "And yet," she countered, "here I am. And here you are, holding a dagger that does not belong to the storeroom." Her tone was calm, but he could sense the coiled power in her words. This was no frightened noblewoman. She was testing him. He weighed his options. Kill her now, strike before she called for guards. But something in her bearing froze him. She looked at him not with fear, but with calculation. As if she already knew the game he played, and killing her would only confirm her victory. "What are you?" she asked softly. "A thief? An assassin? Or perhaps," she tilted her head, studying him with piercing intensity, "a spy?" The word cut sharper than any blade. Marcus forced his expression blank. "I am nothing, Domina. A slave. That is all Rome has left me." Her lips curved, not in kindness but in amusement. "Perhaps. But I have lived long enough to know that a man who calls himself nothing is usually something dangerous. The silence between them tightened, heavy with unspoken truths. At last, she stepped back. I will not call the guards. Not yet. I wish to see how long you can keep your mask. But know this, Marcus, if you are what I suspect, the Senate will not forgive you. And her gaze lingered on him, strangely conflicted, as if she hated what she felt stirring in her own chest. I will not show mercy. She turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Marcus with the dagger still clutched in his hand, his heart pounding harder than it had on any battlefield. The game had begun. Marcus lay awake that night, staring at the rafters above. He should have struck her down. That was the mission. One swift motion, and his people's vengeance would be done. But her eyes haunted him. Eyes that had seen through his disguise with dangerous clarity. Eyes that looked at him not as a slave, but as a man. And for the first time since he had entered Rome, Marcus felt his resolve tremble. Marcus rose before dawn, slipping into the rhythm of a servant's life. He scrubbed marble steps, fetched water from the courtyard cistern, and carried trays of figs and olives into chambers where senators whispered of war. His hands blistered, but his mind was elsewhere. Every task became a calculation, every corridor a map, every guard a weakness, every locked door a challenge. Yet, no matter how he sharpened his focus, her face lingered. Livia Drusilla. She had not called the guards. She had not exposed him. Instead, she had left him suspended in a purgatory of suspicion. Why? To play with him? To use him? The uncertainty made him restless. By midday, whispers filled the palace halls. Livia was to attend a session of the Senate. A vote on taxation and war. She moved through the palace accompanied by scribes and guards, her presence commanding respect. Marcus carried scrolls into the atrium where she paused to speak with a tribune. She caught his gaze, just for a moment. That flicker of recognition, a silent warning, I still see you. The air between them pulsed, sharper than steel. Later that night, when the lamps had dimmed and the palace hummed with quiet, Marcus slipped once more to the storage vault. He should have been sharpening his dagger, steeling himself for the strike. Instead, he found himself tracing the blade's edge distractedly, her words echoing in his head. Footsteps approached. He turned, ready to hide the weapon, but it wasn't a guard. It was her. Again. This time, she bore no cloak. She entered in a simple gown of white linen, her hair unbound, as though daring him to strike. But her eyes were still hard. You waste your nights in shadows, she said. He tensed. And you waste yours following slaves. Her lips twitched at his boldness. You are no slave. No slave carries himself like a centurion. No slave looks me in the eye with defiance. Tell me, Marcus, what is your true name? Silence. His pulse thundered. To answer would be betrayal. To stay silent would confirm her suspicions. Finally, he said, names mean nothing in chains. And yet, she countered, stepping closer, they mean everything when whispered in the Senate. Her nearness unsettled him. She smelled faintly of myrrh and smoke, a scent foreign yet intoxicating. His hand tightened on the dagger at his side. One thrust, and her clever tongue would be silenced forever. But he couldn't move. You could kill me now, she murmured, as if reading his thoughts. Why don't you? His throat tightened. Perhaps I want you to suffer first. Her eyes glittered with dangerous amusement. Or perhaps you hesitate because you fear me. He forced a cold smile. Barbarians do not fear women. Her palm moved suddenly, striking his cheek lightly, almost teasing, but enough to sting. Then perhaps you should start. She turned, her gown whispering across the stone, and left him standing there with his cheek burning and his heart racing. In the days that followed, their game of shadows grew sharper. When Marcus poured her wine, her fingers brushed the cup just as his hand lingered. When she walked through the atrium, her gaze found him, testing him, daring him. She asked questions in passing, about his village, about his knowledge of languages, about the way he carried himself. Always framed as idle curiosity, but laced with suspicion. One evening at supper, she addressed him directly in front of others. Tell me, Marcus, she said with a smile that made the senators chuckle, Did your mother teach you to pour wine with such care, or is it a talent learned in conquest? The hall went still for a breath. Marcus bowed, masking his fury. My mother taught me many things, Domina. How to endure, most of all. The senators laughed, oblivious, but her eyes held his in a duel sharper than any blade. That night, as he returned to the quarters, a handmaid slipped him a scrap of parchment. In elegant script, it read, "Tomorrow. Midnight. The West Garden." His jaw tightened. A summons. Not from a handmaid. Not from a senator. From her. He burned the parchment in the brazier, but the flame could not erase the pounding of his heart. The West Garden lay hidden behind towering hedges, fragrant with roses and cypress. Moonlight silvered the marble statues of gods and heroes. Marcus moved silently, dagger hidden in his tunic, every step a question. Was this a trap? Would she summon guards and end his mission tonight? But she was alone. Livia stood beside the fountain, the water reflecting her pale gown. She looked more like a goddess than a queen, untouchable yet dangerously real. "You came," she said softly. He narrowed his eyes. "You command, I obey." Her lips curved faintly. "Do you? You obey no one. That is why I summoned you." The silence between them throbbed with tension. The night air carried the scent of roses, mingling with the quiet roar of blood in his veins. "Tell me," she said, stepping closer, "why do you hate Rome so fiercely? Enough to risk death in these halls?" He stared at her. Her question pierced deeper than any spear. The image of his father's body on the battlefield flashed before him, the cries of his people enslaved, the smoke of burning villages. "My people are chained," he said finally, his voice low, raw. "Rome feasts on our blood. Every marble stone in this palace is built on bones. And you," his words sharpened, his chest tightening, "you sit on a throne of corpses." Her expression flickered, but she did not look away. Instead, she whispered, "Do you think I asked for this throne? Do you think I chose to carry Rome's burdens while old men in the Senate plot in shadows?" He faltered. The anger in her eyes was not false. It was real. For the first time, Marcus saw not a queen, not an enemy, but a woman. And she, in turn, looked at him not as a slave or spy, but as a man who stood unbroken in chains. The distance between them shrank, breath against breath. His hand hovered near the dagger. Her hand hovered near his chest. Neither struck. The moonlight draped them both in silver, the hush of the garden broken only by the ripple of the fountain. Marcus's hand clenched at his side, the hilt of the dagger digging into his palm, but his eyes stayed on hers. Livia's gaze was unwavering, a storm held behind a mask of calm. "You should kill me," she murmured, her breath close enough to stir the hairs at his temple. It would be so simple. One thrust, and Rome would shake. He swallowed hard, his body taut with restraint. "And you should call your guards. End this charade before it damns us both." "Perhaps I will," she whispered. "But not tonight." The silence burned. Marcus realized his dagger hand had gone slack. He had not even noticed the shift, only that he was standing closer, the line between hunter and prey blurring into something else entirely. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped back, breaking the spell. "Leave, before I change my mind. Tomorrow, you are a slave again. Nothing more." Marcus hesitated, then bowed just enough to disguise the trembling conflict in his chest. He vanished into the hedges, her figure etched in his mind like fire on stone. Days bled into weeks, and their game of suspicion deepened. She questioned him in sly riddles, testing his wit before the senators. He answered with half-truths, careful not to reveal himself yet refusing to bow too low. The others laughed, thinking it banter, but beneath the surface their every word was a duel. One evening, when storms rolled over the city, she summoned him privately again. "Tell me," she said, pacing the chamber as thunder cracked, "do you think me a tyrant? Or a prisoner of my own senate?" Marcus crossed his arms, his eyes following her like a wolf watching a hawk. "Both. A tyrant to my people. A prisoner to your men." She stilled, her back to him. "Do you know why I have not exposed you?" "Because you enjoy the danger," he said. She turned, and her face was carved in firelight, sharp yet vulnerable. Because if I hand you to the Senate, they will pry you apart like a carcass. And in their zeal, they will see my house weakened. My power questioned. I am protecting you, barbarian, because in some twisted way, protecting you protects me. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and Marcus felt something stir in him, something unfamiliar, unwelcome. Pity. No, not pity. Recognition. He stepped closer, their silhouettes crossing in the flickering light. Then we are both prisoners, he murmured. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, there was no Rome, no chains, no dagger between them. Only the dangerous pull of two enemies bound by something neither could name. But the door burst open. Domina. A guard's voice filled the chamber. The Senate requests your presence at once. Her mask snapped back into place. She brushed past Marcus, but not before her fingers brushed his hand, a touch so brief it could have been imagined. Stay hidden, she whispered, then was gone. That night, Marcus heard whispers in the servants' quarters. A rumor spreading, a spy in the palace. The Senate had grown restless. Someone had betrayed him, or worse, someone had seen too much. His blood ran cold. He crept to the peristyle garden, where shadows stretched long beneath the torchlight. He waited, every muscle coiled, until she appeared, her cloak drawn tight against the wind. They know, she said without preamble. Not your name, not your face, but they smell blood. The Senate is suspicious of me, and by extension, of you. They will watch us both now. Then let me end it, Marcus growled. His hand closed around his dagger. One strike, tonight. Before they can act. No. Her voice was sharper than he had ever heard, cutting through the night. He froze, dagger half drawn. You kill me, the Senate will turn you into a symbol of barbarian treachery. My death will not free your people, it will chain them tighter. And if you flee, they will hunt you until your body hangs on the Capitoline Hill. There is no victory in blood, Marcus. His name in her mouth struck him like a hammer. She had never spoken it with such urgency before. His chest rose and fell, fury tangled with despair. Then what do you suggest? That I bow? That I lick Roman boots until I die an old man in chains? No, she stepped closer, her eyes fierce, almost blazing. That you live. That you wait. That you fight not with blades, but with wit. If the Senate believes you useful to me, they will not kill you. And if you survive, you may yet carve something greater than vengeance. Her words struck him harder than any spear. Survival was not what he had sworn for. And yet, staring into her eyes, Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. You speak like one of us, he said, voice low. And you, she replied, like one of Rome. The storm above them broke, rain pouring down in torrents, plastering their hair and clothes to their skin. Neither moved. Neither looked away. At last, Marcus sheathed his dagger. For the first time since entering the palace, he felt unmoored, not a spy, not a slave, not a barbarian. Just a man standing before a woman, drenched and burning inside. She touched his face, her fingers cold from rain, but steady. We are both trapped, she whispered. Perhaps, together, we might find a way out. The moment hung between them, fragile and perilous, before she stepped back into the storm. Marcus stood alone, his heart roaring louder than the thunder. The Senate's suspicion spread like a plague. Whispers slithered through marble corridors, dripping with venom. A senator had seen too much, Marcus lingering too near the queen, her eyes straying toward him more than once. Alone, it was nothing. But in Rome, nothing became everything if enough tongues wagged. By morning, guards lingered longer in the halls, their glances sharp and searching. Fabia, the handmaiden, avoided Marcus's eyes, though he felt her watching from doorways. Every step became a test of restraint. The order came swiftly, all slaves in the palace were to be questioned. Marcus knew it before Livia told him. He found her in the library, her silhouette caught against shelves of scrolls. Her face was calm, but her fingers twisted the hem of her gown in agitation. They will question you, she said quietly. Each one dragged before the Senate chamber. They will look for the slightest crack. He leaned against the column, forcing a smirk. Then perhaps I should confess. End this game. Her eyes flashed, the mask slipping. Do not mock me, barbarian. If you fall, I fall with you. They already doubt me. If you are unmasked, they will say I harbored you. That I invited treachery into Rome's heart. The weight of her words sank heavy. His mission had always been vengeance alone, but now, her fate was tangled with his. Then let them come, he said. I have played soldier before. I can play slave. The Senate chamber was a cavern of echoing stone, columns rising like the ribs of a beast. Marcus knelt on the marble floor, chains clinking at his wrists. He had not been bound since the day of his capture, but here, before the eyes of Rome, they sought to reduce him. The senators circled like vultures, their togas whispering against the floor. State your name, one demanded. Marcus, he said evenly. Your origin? The North. Taken in conquest. Your loyalty? Marcus raised his eyes, meeting their glares with careful humility. To Rome. I serve where commanded. Murmurs rippled. His answers were flawless, drilled into him with weeks of careful disguise. But still, suspicion clung. Finally, one senator sneered. Why then does the queen keep you so close? You serve her chamber, her table, her household. There are hundreds of slaves, yet she favors you. The chamber buzzed with approval of the question. The trap was set. Marcus lowered his gaze, his mind racing. To admit closeness was to feed the fire. To deny it was to insult her publicly. But before he could answer, her voice rang clear across the chamber. Because, Livia said, sweeping forward in her dark cloak, he is useful. Every head turned. She descended the steps with regal poise, her voice steady and commanding. Marcus speaks two tongues. He understands the ways of the North. He has served as interpreter when Rome needs ears in barbarian markets. Shall I not use the tools Rome has given me? Her words slid through the chamber like oil. Some nodded reluctantly, others narrowed their eyes. And if he is not what he seems, a senator pressed. Then I will deal with him, she said coldly, her gaze lingering on Marcus like a blade. As Queen Regent, I take full responsibility. If he falters, his blood stains my hands, not yours. The senators muttered, but none dared challenge her openly. For now, she had shielded him. The chains were removed, and Marcus was dismissed. That night, he found her again in the West Garden, the storm-lashed roses bending under weight of dew. You risked much, he said, voice low. She turned to him, her eyes fierce. I claimed you as mine, barbarian. If you fall, so do I. Do you understand now why you cannot fail me? He stepped closer, shadows pooling around them. I never asked for your protection. No, she whispered, but you have it nonetheless. Their eyes locked. The air between them throbbed, heavy with what neither dared say. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, trembling with restraint. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, softly, she leaned into it. The contact was brief, too brief, but it shattered every wall he had built. The queen and the spy, enemies by blood and oath, stood in silence as the garden's fountain trickled on, knowing the ground beneath them was crumbling. But the game could not pause. By dawn, Marcus learned the Senate had ordered spies of their own. Guards patrolled the palace with sharper eyes. Servants whispered of plots and purges. The walls of Rome were closing in. And when Fabia, the handmaiden, cornered him in the corridor with fear in her eyes, she whispered words that struck him cold. They know more than they should. Someone has betrayed you. And when they move, it will not be for questioning. It will be for execution. The air in the palace thickened, every corridor whispering with unseen eyes. Marcus carried trays and scrubbed floors with the same calculated calm, but he felt it, guards shadowing his steps, slaves shrinking away as though his presence itself might invite punishment. It came 2 nights later. He had barely lain down on the hard pallet when the door to the slave quarters crashed open. Torches flared, boots thundered. Roman guards poured inside like wolves. There, one barked, pointing to him. Marcus leapt to his feet, but chains met his wrists before his dagger could clear his tunic. Iron bit his flesh, forcing him to his knees. He snarled, struggling, but the weight of a dozen soldiers pressed him down. Spy, one hissed. No, another corrected with grim satisfaction, traitor. They dragged him through the torchlit halls, past columns carved with victories of Rome, past marble gods staring with indifferent eyes. His bare feet slapped against the cold stone. When the Senate chamber doors swung open, the air inside was thick with perfume, sweat, and politics. Senators crowded the marble steps, their voices buzzing like hornets. And at the center, high on her dais, sat Livia. Her face was carved in marble composure, but when her eyes fell on Marcus, blooded, chained, something flickered, sharp and fleeting. He caught it. Concern. Marcus of the North, a senator announced, voice booming across the chamber. You stand accused of deceit, of plotting treachery within the very heart of Rome. Evidence has been brought forth, hidden weapons, strange movements in the night, whispers with servants unfit for their station. What say you? Marcus met their gazes, defiant despite the blood on his lip. I say Rome fears shadows more than swords. Laughter, bitter and sharp, rippled through the chamber. Another senator rose, eyes narrowing. You were placed in her household. You lingered at her table, her chamber, her private gardens. Too close. Far too close. Do you deny it? Marcus said nothing. Silence was safer than any lie. The murmur swelled into a storm. Treachery. Sedition. The queen compromised. Finally, one voice cut through, he must be executed. Publicly. Let the people see Rome devours its spies. A chorus of approval thundered. But then Livia stood. Enough. Her voice carried over them like the crack of a whip. The chamber stilled. You accuse me by accusing him. You say he lingers in my service? Yes, because I placed him there. You say he speaks in shadows? Yes, because I commanded it. Every act you lay at his feet is mine, not his. The words struck like thrown daggers. The chamber erupted again, some shouting outrage, others stunned into silence. You admit this? One senator demanded. I admit that Marcus is a tool, Livia said, her chin high, her eyes sharp. A blade I kept in my hand, turned toward Rome's enemies. If you call him spy, then he is mine. If you call him traitor, then I am guilty with him. The uproar swelled. Some senators shouted for her removal, others for his immediate execution. But her words had cracked the chamber in two. Amid the chaos, Marcus met her gaze. For the first time, he saw not just the queen protecting herself, but the woman choosing to tether her fate to his. The chains dug into his wrists, but his chest burned with something fierce, something terrible and alive. That night, they threw him into the Tullianum, the prison beneath the Capitoline Hill. Cold stone pressed against his back, chains rattling with every breath. Rats scuttled in the dark. He should have felt despair. Death was coming, whether by sword or cross, Rome did not forgive. But all he could think of was her voice, ringing like steel in the Senate. If you call him traitor, then I am guilty with him. The scrape of iron echoed. A torch flickered at the cell door. And there she was. Cloaked, her hair hidden, but her eyes unmistakable. You are reckless, Marcus rasped, voice rough. They already suspect me of everything, she cut him off, stepping inside. Her hand brushed the chains at his wrists. If I am to fall, I will not let them take you first. His throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she was mad, that she should have let him die. But the words caught, strangled by the fire that burned between them. Instead, he whispered, why? Her fingers lingered on his, soft despite the iron. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. Because somewhere between suspicion and truth, I forgot which of us was the enemy. The silence that followed was unbearable. The walls, the chains, the empire itself all seemed to vanish in the weight of her words. And then, slowly, impossibly, she leaned forward. Her lips brushed his, featherlight but real, carrying the taste of myrrh and defiance. A kiss stolen in the shadows of Rome, fragile as a spark in the dark. When she pulled away, her eyes shone with a war she could not win. Hold on, she whispered. I will find a way. And she was gone, leaving him chained in darkness, burning with a hope more dangerous than any dagger he had ever held. Morning brought no warmth, only the roar of the city preparing for spectacle. Marcus sat in his chains, head bowed, listening as footsteps thundered overhead. He knew what it meant, the games would open with his death. The cell door groaned, and 2 guards entered. "On your feet, barbarian." The chains were dragged tight, yanking him forward. His bare feet scraped stone, but Marcus did not stumble. If this was his end, he would meet it standing tall. They led him out into blinding sunlight. The forum stretched wide before him, a sea of citizens gathered like vultures. The air crackled with hunger, with bloodlust. At the center stood the platform. A scaffold, waiting. The herald's voice rang out, Marcus of the northern tribes, accused of treachery, condemned by the Senate to death. The crowd jeered, shouting slurs, spitting as he passed. Chains rattled like funeral drums. But then Livia appeared. She stood at the edge of the rostra, draped in regal crimson, a crown of laurel upon her dark hair. Her presence silenced the mob in a single breath. Even the herald faltered. "Stop," she commanded. The guards hesitated. The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling like wind over water. "The Senate condemned him," one of the praetorians said, sweat on his brow. "The Senate," Livia's voice cut sharp, "does not command Rome." "I do." A dangerous silence fell. The senators seated in their marble rows leaned forward, whispers like blades in the air. "Release him," she ordered. The praetorians exchanged nervous glances. No one disobeyed the Senate lightly, but neither did they defy the queen in front of the people. One senator rose, crimson with rage. "This is madness. You cannot overrule." "I can," she snapped, "and I will." The crowd, sensing the fracture, surged with voices, some crying for blood, others chanting her name. Marcus stood at the center, chains still binding him, while Rome itself trembled between execution and rebellion. And then, with deliberate grace, Livia descended the steps. She walked across the stones until she stood before him, so close he could feel the warmth of her presence. Her hand lifted, delicate but unyielding, and rested on his chains. "If he dies," she said, loud enough for the mob to hear, "then so do I. For this man is bound to me not as enemy, not as traitor, but as ally." A roar erupted, shock, fury, awe. The senator's voice cracked like a whip. "You would throw Rome into chaos for him?" Livia's eyes did not waver. Better chaos than corruption. Better love than fear. The word hung in the air, heavier than any decree, love. The crowd gasped, torn between scandal and fever. Marcus could hardly breathe. To hear it spoken aloud, before gods and men, was more dangerous than any dagger he had carried into the palace. The Praetorian commander looked from the senators to the queen, sweat dripping down his temple. Then, with a grunt, he struck the shackles from Marcus's wrists. Iron fell, clattering against stone. Marcus flexed his freed hands, meeting Livia's gaze. For a moment, the world held its breath. And then, pandemonium. Some in the crowd cheered wildly, others screamed betrayal. Senators shouted for her removal, for her arrest. Guards raised shields, forming lines against surging bodies. Livia turned to him, eyes burning. "Go. Now." "I won't leave you," Marcus growled, stepping closer. "You must. If you stay, they'll kill us both. But if you escape, then perhaps there is still a chance." His jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed to stay, to fight, to cut through the mob with her at his side. But her eyes, fierce, pleading, certain, left no room for argument. "Where?" he demanded. "Beyond the Tiber. I will send word." Her fingers brushed his for the briefest heartbeat. "Trust me." The guards shoved forward, the mob shrieking louder. Livia turned, raising her arms, commanding the crowd's fury upon herself. And Marcus slipped into the chaos. Through alleys, past broken stalls, across the bridge, the city roared like a beast at his back. But he did not stop running until the marble spires were a distant shimmer behind him. When he finally collapsed beneath the shadows of the hills, breath ragged, wrists raw, he knew only one thing with certainty. Rome was no longer his enemy. But the Senate would hunt them both.